The profound secret of Isaiah, what he knew about the war, now beginning between Israel and Iran. Have you ever wondered if someone, thousands of years ago, could have seen everything we are witnessing today? Armies marching across the Middle East, threats crossing borders, fragile alliances that could collapse at any moment. Among all the prophets who ever lived, only one dared to record visions so detailed they seemed impossible. His name was Isaiah, and what he wrote was not trapped in the past. His words crossed the centuries like a sealed warning, waiting for the right moment to be opened. Imagine discovering that the conflicts between Israel and Iran, which now dominate headlines around the world, were already described on scrolls of parchment before Rome was even founded. That the crowds gathering for war, the cries of hatred, and the siege upon Jerusalem are not merely geopolitics, but part of a prophetic cycle he described with unsettling precision. Why was Isaiah called the prophet of the final cycle? Why are his predictions so specific that even skeptical scholars cannot ignore them? And most importantly, if he saw the beginning of this conflict, what else did he know about its end? Today, you will embark on a journey that may forever transform the way you see the Bible and history. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear is not just an ancient narrative. It is a divine code that has crossed time to reach us. This content is free, but the decision about what you will do with it is yours alone. If this message speaks to your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This helps us continue revealing forgotten truths. And what if I told you that Isaiah not only foresaw the rise and fall of empires, but also saw the exact moment when Israel would become the epicenter of a global crisis, that he left clues about how it would all begin and how it could all end? Coincidence? No. What you will discover today will take your breath away, because Isaiah was the only prophet who dared to record the entire future, including this very moment we are living. Prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know, because by the end of this story, you will never see war and faith the same way again. The temple was almost empty. It was too early for the morning incense, too late for the night watch. In that strange hour, when the servants dozed against the columns and the birds had yet to break into song, Isaiah entered in absolute silence. His footsteps echoed across the courtyard, so clear they seemed to question his right to be there. He stopped at the foot of the altar and closed his eyes. For a moment, he breathed only the scent of cold stone and the oil that had dripped from ancient offerings. Nothing in that dawn foretold what was about to happen. Not the murmur of the winds in the corridors, nor the creaking of the beams in the ceiling. The world seemed contained in its routine until the presence manifested. Isaiah first felt a warmth in his chest, so sudden that his heart raced as if it wanted to flee his body. He tried to open his eyes, but the brightness burned them. Then he knelt, not by choice, but because his legs could no longer hold him. "Isaiah," said the voice. It was not a sound that traveled through the air. It was a vibration that came from within, resonating in every cell, every fear, every hope. "Son of Amoz, listen." The prophet pressed his hands to his chest. Tears began to fall, though he could not tell whether it was terror or something deeper than fear. "Lord," he murmured between sobs, "what do you want of me?" The silence that followed seemed to last millennia. Then the voice spoke again. "Today I set your destiny apart from the destiny of other men, for your eyes will see what they refuse to see, your mouth will speak what they will not bear to hear." Isaiah trembled. Deep inside, he knew nothing would ever be simple again. For whoever beholds the heart of the ages never returns unscathed. "I am only dust," he whispered. "My lips are unclean. I am not worthy." An intense light filled the temple. Every column seemed made of flame. Every tapestry stirred without wind. And then he saw them. Beings without human name, with wings covering their faces and feet, singing a melody that split the air into flashes of brilliance. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." The whole earth is full of his glory. The floor shook. The doors groaned in protest. And Isaiah's heart seemed to break, not in despair, but in an astonishment so absolute that no pride remained. One of the beings flew to the altar. With tongs, it took a live coal and approached him. Its heat cut through the distance like a blade. Isaiah wanted to draw back, but he could not move a single muscle. "Your iniquity shall be removed," said the voice. "Your sin shall be atoned for." The coal touched his mouth. The fire burned not only flesh, it consumed all that was doubt. All that was limitation, all that had been Isaiah before that instant. When all ceased, he fell forward, bracing himself on his palms. He breathed like a man resurfacing from a dive too long. And then, for the first time, he dared to lift his face. The light had softened, but it was no less real. "Whom shall I send?" said the voice. "Who will go for us?" The silence was complete, a silence that seemed to weigh the cost of freedom. Then Isaiah knew that moment sealed everything, the past, the present, and all that would come after. And even without strength, even without understanding, he whispered, "Here am I. Send me." The wings withdrew. The light faded to a gentle clarity. The temple, which had seemed to quake, was now calm, but Isaiah would never be the same. Behind a column, one of the priests who had awakened in time to glimpse part of the vision fell to his knees. His eyes wide, his mouth open without a voice. "Oh, what did you see?" he murmured. "Why does your face shine like that?" Isaiah drew a deep breath. His voice came out steadier than it had ever been. "I saw the glory that upholds the world," he said, "and I heard the call that cannot be disobeyed." The man lowered his gaze, unable to bear the weight of that certainty. Isaiah rose slowly. Each step felt firmer than before. He knew many would not believe him. He knew he would face mockery, threats, exile. But he also knew none of that mattered. For whoever has heard the voice of the Eternal owes no more explanations to men. That day, when he left the temple, the sun was rising over Jerusalem. But no dawn could ever rival what he carried within his heart. And what he had seen would mark all generations. For no one who heard his words could ever pretend not to know. The sun was rising slowly over Jerusalem. The first light touched the rooftops, bathing the walls, worn by centuries of pride and promises, in gold. But no brightness seemed able to dispel the shadow gathering in the hearts of men. It was as if the entire city were holding its breath. Some rushed to reinforce the gates, others lined up at the wells, filling jars with water, and there were those who simply sat on the house steps, staring at the horizon with a weariness that no longer had a name. Isaiah walked slowly, his light cloak stirring dust with every step. His gaze did not seek only the towers or the newly driven beams. He saw deeper. He saw something no one else seemed willing to face. When he reached the valley gate, a group of elders was gathered, debating in tense voices. "If we accept their terms, perhaps they will spare our lives," said one, striking his staff against the ground. "We cannot sacrifice an entire generation out of pride." "If we surrender," retorted another, his forehead marked by deep lines, "we will be slaves forever. There will be no Jerusalem." "There will be none either way," said a third, in a voice so low it sounded like confessing a sin. "Do you not see the signs?" Isaiah stopped beside them. His silence alone was enough to stifle the murmurs. One by one, the men lifted their faces. None dared to speak first. "You are not merely debating your defense," he said at last. "You are debating your hearts. For it is not only the siege of men that threatens you. It is the siege of the Most High, who will weigh each soul as wheat is weighed on the threshing floor." The eldest elder lifted his chin, trying to maintain his dignity. "Then is there nothing we can do?" Isaiah looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through flesh. "You could have listened before," he replied, without hatred in his tone, while there was still time to choose humility over arrogance. When the temple doors opened, not only for rituals, but for true repentance. The man lowered his gaze, unable to bear the weight of those words. One of the younger men dared to raise his voice. "But now, is there any hope at all?" Isaiah sighed. The wind carried the bitter smell of fires burning outside the walls. "For those who fear the name," he said, "there is always hope, but for those who think they can deceive the judge, not even a memory will remain." He continued walking. Every street seemed to hold memories, the victories sung in psalms, the pacts betrayed in the secrecy of chambers, the children born without knowing they inherited a debt that was never theirs. Jerusalem was not just stone upon stone. It was a living record of everything men had chosen to love more than truth. When he passed through the market, he saw that a few stalls were still open. A merchant was laying out fabrics before customers who pretended to be interested. "They are from Tyre," the man declared, his voice strained with forced cheer. "Who knows if tomorrow we will have any of this at all?" Isaiah stopped a few paces away. The merchant turned, and for an instant their eyes met. The smile died on the man's lips. Without a word from anyone, he lowered his head and closed the bundle, for there was no bargain, no sale, no treaty that could postpone the inevitable. On the northern wall, the captain of the guard watched the enemy camp. The rows of tents multiplied like weeds. The sounds of hammers and iron announced siege engines taking shape. Seeing Isaiah approach, the captain drew a deep breath. "Prophet," he said in a restrained tone, "have you come to measure our defenses?" Isaiah placed his hand on the parapet stone. His fingers felt the cold and roughness, as if all of Jerusalem were summed up in that wall, strong but not eternal. "No," he replied, "I came to see how much faith remains inside." The captain did not answer. He followed Isaiah's gaze to the horizon. Then he lowered his voice. "You know we will not win, don't you?" Isaiah did not turn. "No, you will not win," he said, "for victory does not belong to those who trust only in walls." A heavy silence fell. The wind stirred the banners, and the enemy torches flickered like watchful eyes. Then the captain whispered, "Are we already condemned?" Isaiah finally turned. His eyes were not harsh, but carried an ancient sorrow. "Condemned? No," he said, "but weighed and found wanting." At dusk, Isaiah walked down the Watergate Street. Women washed garments in silence. Children played, unaware that every laugh was a precious interval before the storm. He stopped, drew a deep breath, and saw again. He saw that the siege was not only made of spears and walls, it was made of pride, of denial, of hardened hearts. And so he knew Jerusalem was suspended in time, between the chance for repentance and the abyss of ruin. And every man, every woman, had to decide. When the last glow of the day died on the temple's summit, Isaiah lowered his face, and no one there was ready to accept it, not even those who claimed to believe. The hills around Jerusalem seemed to rest in silence, but behind every stone there were watchful eyes. Assyrian spies moved along the trails, searching for any sign of weakness. Yet in the heart of the city, a different battle was unfolding, a struggle against forgetting. In a narrow room lit only by a small lamp, 3 men leaned over a low table. The oldest scribe ran his fingers across the parchment scrolls, as if bidding farewell to a son. "We must hide them today," he said, his voice hoarse. "When they start looting, nothing will be left intact." The youngest swallowed hard, glancing at the walls. The fear was so thick it seemed to have weight. "If they find us, they'll accuse us of treason," he said. "They'll say we kept prophecies against the king." The third man, his face lined and his hands stained with ink, looked up. There was something serene in his expression. "The words do not belong to the king," he replied, "nor to us. They belong to the one who spoke through Isaiah." In the corner of the room, Isaiah watched in silence. The last days had consumed almost all the strength left in his body, but his eyes burned with a flame that neither exhaustion nor threat could extinguish. "Write," he ordered calmly, "and when you finish, take everything, hide it where no one dares to look." The younger scribe moistened his pen and began to copy. Every stroke felt more final than the last. Every letter, a spark of something even he did not fully understand. "Behold, the Lord stretches out his hand against the nations. Behold, pride shall be consumed like straw." The other two bent over new scrolls, whispering each sentence so no syllable would be lost. Sweat dripped from their brows. Even there, in the dimness, they felt each word was alive, and that one day it would become fire upon slumbering consciences. When the work was done, the eldest rolled up the scrolls with trembling hands. "Will it be enough?" he murmured. "Or should we take other texts too?" Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder with a tenderness no prophetic tone could erase. "Take what your arms can carry," he said. "The rest God will keep as he always has." The men gathered the scrolls in leather satchels. Before leaving, they turned to him. "And you?" the young scribe asked. "Will you not come with us?" Isaiah shook his head. "I am what was spoken," he replied. "And wherever I am, the word will be." No one dared insist. Night fell over Jerusalem like a leaden veil. The gates were barred, the sentinels doubled, but no one noticed three figures slipping across the stone path with the cautious steps of men carrying more than they could afford to lose. They crossed the valley and climbed the cracks in the slope until they reached a small cave. There, among twisted roots and cold stones, the scribes laid down the scrolls one by one. The eldest knelt. His fingers rested on the smooth leather. "Oh God," he whispered, "guard these words as you guard your own faithfulness." The wind blew through the crevice, lifting grains of sand that clung to the tears on his face. "Why do we hide what should be read by all?" the youngest asked, his voice breaking. "Why must the truth be buried?" The elder lifted his chin. His eyes shone in the dimness. "Because the fire that consumes lies does not destroy what is pure," he said. But some could not bear to see that fire now. As they returned, Isaiah remained in the temple. His breath came in short gasps. He knew he would not live to see the day those scrolls were found. But he also knew that when that day came, no one could claim ignorance. The eldest scribe arrived last. He stopped before Isaiah, his hands empty. "We did as you commanded," he said. "They are safely hidden." Isaiah nodded, exhausted. "And one day," he murmured, "they will set more than parchment ablaze. They will set hearts on fire." The man lowered his gaze. "And if they are forgotten?" Isaiah raised his eyes to the temple's ceiling, where a crack let in the pale light of the stars. "Neither fire nor exile nor time can extinguish what God ignites," he said. "The flame will remain, waiting for the generation that will have the courage to read it." That night, while the enemy legions beat their war drums, few knew that the most dangerous flame was not in the walls or the weapons. It was hidden, wrapped in leather, sleeping in the darkness of a cave. And even if years, centuries, empires passed, one day it would awaken. And one day it would set slumbering consciences ablaze, revealing everything men had tried to silence. Before we continue, we ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to bless us and help us keep bringing these profound Bible stories to more hearts. Now we continue with the prophetic journey of Isaiah. The smell of smoke came long before the sight. Well before any man reached the gates of Samaria, the wind carried the acrid odor of ruin. The hills that once held vineyards and fig trees were now carpets of ash. And among the shattered walls, a silence lingered, the kind that remains when all hope has already been consumed by fire. Isaiah walked slowly over the rubble. His stained cloak trailed black dust that clung to his feet. Beside him, two disciples tried not to look at the bodies curled in the shadows of the walls, but he did not avert his gaze, for he knew that only those who can behold judgment without flinching can speak of restoration without hypocrisy. He stopped beside a stone that had fallen from the wall. On it, part of an inscription was still visible, "The Fortress of the Kings of Israel." Isaiah passed his palm over the scorched surface. It felt as if he could hear the echo of ancient voices, generals boasting of victories, merchants swearing endless prosperity, priests who had forgotten whom they were meant to honor. "Samaria did not fall because of military weakness," he said without turning. "It fell because it forgot the one who gave it every stone of this wall." The younger disciple drew a deep breath. trying to suppress his nausea. "Master," he whispered, "all of this, was it inevitable?" Isaiah lowered his chin. When he spoke, his voice held no anger, only the gravity of someone who no longer expects to be understood. "Inevitable, if pride was not torn out," he said. "Because when a city makes arrogance its wall, the Eternal will show that no stone remains standing." The older disciple knelt and touched the blackened ground. "And Jerusalem?" he asked. "Will it be any different?" Isaiah turned slowly. His eyes, red with exhaustion and compassion, glimmered in the warm dawn light. "If it listens, yes," he replied. "But few are willing to listen until their own walls are the ones that fall." As he spoke, men with covered faces searched the rubble for anything that could still be sold or buried. Children followed behind them, gathering shards of pottery, fragments of scorched cloth, the last crumbs of a life that no longer existed. Isaiah walked down a street that had once been a market. The arches were twisted. The houses opened like mouths that screamed without sound. At one point, he found an old man sitting on a pile of bricks. His eyes were dry, fixed on nothing. "What do you see, old one?" the prophet asked. The man slowly lifted his chin. When he spoke, it was as if he were recalling every moment of a nightmare. "I came looking for my son," he said, "but all I found was this." He opened his hand. In his palm lay a broken amulet, small, useless, powerless. Isaiah looked down at the object, then lifted his eyes to the old man. "That which you trusted in did not save you," he said, "but your soul can still be saved." The man did not answer. He pressed the amulet to his chest and lowered his head. Sometimes pain is still more comfortable than repentance. In the afternoon, Isaiah gathered those who followed him. Between the broken columns of an old portico, he raised his voice. "Listen, remnant of Israel," he cried, "for what your eyes see here is only a mirror. If Jerusalem walks the same path, it will drink from the same cup." A murmur ran through the group. Some looked away. Others shook their heads in silent protest. It was hard to accept that glory could end in ashes. Easier to believe this was merely the bad fortune of a neighboring city. "Do not be deceived," Isaiah continued. "No city is so high that it cannot be cast down. No people so prosperous that it cannot be humbled." The young disciple stepped closer, his eyes full of tears. "But if everything is so fragile," he said, his voice breaking, "why did God give us walls? Why did he let us prosper?" Isaiah placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. The gesture was so gentle the boy shivered. "Because he hopes for gratitude and humility," he replied. "But when he receives pride and injustice instead, the same favor that raised you up is the favor that will be withdrawn." Behind them, a half-burned tower groaned in the wind. With a dry crack, part of it collapsed. Dust rose like a veil over the witnesses. When the cloud settled, no one dared to speak. The sun was beginning to set when Isaiah turned his eyes to Jerusalem, visible in the distance. Its walls shone in the evening light, as if to declare to the world that nothing could happen there. "I see pride," he murmured. "I see arrogance. I see the same seed that grew here." The elder scribe recorded every word. His pen trembled and tears fell onto the parchment. "And will there also be ruin?" he asked. Isaiah took a deep breath. When he answered, his voice was almost a lament. "There will be," he said, "but there will also be opportunity, because restoration only comes after brokenness." On the horizon, Jerusalem gleamed, suspended in the illusion of its own invulnerability. And soon, a neighboring city would taste the same judgment, never imagining that the flame that consumed Samaria was already burning at its gates. The leaden sky seemed to press down upon the whole land. Not a single ray of light pierced the thick blanket of clouds gathering in the north. The wind brought a strange chill, as if each gust were the breath of something ancient awakening. Isaiah climbed alone to the highest point of Jerusalem's wall. His disciples waited below, afraid to follow. Up there the wind seemed to have a voice. Each blast whispered omens that only he dared to hear. He took a deep breath, sensing the smell of damp earth that comes before the storm. Then he raised his arms, and his voice split the still air. "Hear, O Damascus," he shouted, "for thus says the Lord, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins." The words hovered over the city and all who heard them. One of the guards watching the gate turned to another man. "Has he gone mad?" he murmured. "Who dares to proclaim the end of so ancient a city?" The other remained silent. He only looked at the horizon, where the clouds grew, and a shiver climbed his spine. Isaiah lowered his arms. He closed his eyes as though gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but even more resolute. "The pride of Aram will fall. Its palaces will turn to dust. Its warriors will scatter like leaves before the wind." Thunder boomed in the north, so loud the walls trembled. Many took it for coincidence, others as confirmation. A scribe ran to the base of the tower, carrying scrolls and a pen already wet with ink. "Master!" he called, breathless. "Repeat the words. We must record them." Isaiah opened his eyes. His gaze reached across distances no one else could measure. "Write," he said. "Behold, the Lord declares, the fortress of Ephraim will vanish. The kingdom of Damascus will disappear like a mirage." The scribe wrote down every syllable, his hands shaking. When he finished, he lifted his face. "Why us?" he asked. "Why are we the ones who must carry these words?" Isaiah turned slowly. There was both tenderness and sorrow in his expression. "Because someone must bear witness," he said, "so that one day when all is fulfilled, no one will say, 'We were not warned.'" That night, as Jerusalem prepared for the vigil, some men set out toward the north. They had heard Isaiah's proclamation and wanted to see for themselves if Damascus was truly threatened. For many days, they returned with nothing but rumors. The city remained standing, its gates open, its markets full. The generals of Aram laughed at the news from Judah. "What kind of prophet predicts ruin where there is only prosperity?" they mocked. "Who dares imagine the fall of a city that has withstood so many kingdoms?" Isaiah kept silent. He knew disbelief was always more comfortable than fear. But in the year when the rains failed, and the caravans stopped coming, and trade began to dry up, the first murmurs arose. When the Assyrian army descended like a storm, no one laughed anymore. Years later, one of Isaiah's disciples walked among the ruins that sprawled where proud Damascus had once stood. The wind stirred tattered curtains in empty windows. Dust rose in whirlwinds, covering ancient inscriptions with a film of oblivion. "It all came to pass," the man whispered. "All of it, word for word." Beside him, another disciple picked up a shard of pottery on which part of a royal name was still visible. "And even so," he said, "no one believed until they saw it." The first drew a deep breath, clutching the scroll he carried wrapped in his cloak. "Isaiah said it would be this way," he murmured, "that only the humble would heed the warning before it was too late." When they returned to Jerusalem, they found the prophet sitting in the temple courtyard. The setting sun lit his face, etched by years of scorn and loneliness. "Did you see?" Isaiah asked, without moving. "Did you touch the charred stones?" "Yes, Master," the disciple said. "Everything was as you foretold." Isaiah lowered his chin. His gaze seemed to lose itself among the paving stones. "Then write," he said. "Pride goes before destruction, arrogance before the fall." The disciple wrote every word with trembling hands. When he finished, he lifted his eyes. "Was that all?" he asked. "Just so everyone would see the prophet was right?" Isaiah raised his face, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes shone not with lament, but with a hope no conqueror could erase. "No," he said, "it was so they would know that no judgment is final, that from the dust repentance can still be born." The disciple fell silent, the scroll still damp with ink. The wind blew, gentler now, as if it wished to sweep away the ashes and make room for something new. But Isaiah knew Damascus was only the first chapter. Other kingdoms, other cities, other generations would drink from the same cup. But Damascus was only the beginning of a cycle no one would stop, a cycle that would reach the ends of history. It was dawn when the first scouts appeared on the horizon, small silhouettes approaching in the mist, like shadows cast by the future. They carried no banners, but every man on the walls felt that familiar stab of dread in his chest. The march of the legions always began this way, with silence and distance. Then came the standards, the trumpets, the clatter of shields. And finally, the roar no wall could contain. Isaiah was already awake. He had spent the night sitting in the shadow of the temple, his eyes open as if keeping watch over dreams. When a sentinel ran to him, breathless, pointing toward the valley, the prophet didn't need to ask what was happening. "It is them," he said simply, "those who were meant to come." The soldier swallowed hard. "How many?" he stammered. "How many are coming?" Isaiah lifted his face to the sky brightening above them, the wind stirring his robe. "As many as suffice," he replied, "for it is not the number that matters, but the purpose." When morning overtook the city, the rumor had already spread. In the markets, no one bought. At the gates, no one passed. Children clung to their mothers. The older men climbed the towers, searching for signs to confirm their darkest fears. Isaiah walked among them slowly, as if each step marked a rhythm only he could hear. He stopped at the main gate, where the commander of the guard was poring over maps with a vacant expression. "Where do they come from?" the man asked without lifting his eyes. "From the north? The east?" Isaiah placed his hand on the parchment laid out before him. "From every place," he said, "for the east and the west will unite against this city, like two arms of the same judgment." The commander closed the map, his breathing heavy. "Then there was nothing we could have done to prevent this," he whispered. Isaiah drew a deep breath. His voice was so calm it almost sounded like an insult. "You did everything," he said, "everything that draws the weight of God's hand." At dusk, the first standard appeared around the bend in the road. It was black cloth, embroidered with a figure few recognized, a lion with flaming eyes. Behind it, columns of men marched in cadence. The noise of sandals, metal, and voices grew like a rising tide. The walls filled with watchers. Some princes came to the parapet pale. When one of them saw the prophet, he raised his voice. "Isaiah!" he shouted. "Are these the armies you foretold?" The prophet did not take his eyes from the valley. "They are," he said, "and each of them carries the seed of something greater." The prince clenched his teeth. "Then they will bring destruction upon us?" Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment. "They will bring revelation," he replied, "for when everything falls, you will see who you truly are." The drums began at nightfall. 3 beats, a long silence, then another strike, deep, like thunder that needed no sky. Each note seemed to pound inside the hearts of the people. In the market, women fell to their knees, clutching children to their chests. In the palace, counselors looked at each other, knowing no alliance would suffice. On the walls, the young guards exchanged glances that confessed a fear no speech could erase. Isaiah turned to his disciples. His eyes, inflamed by tears that would not fall, were harder than stone. "Write," he ordered. "Behold, the Lord summons nations from afar. Their warriors come in wrath, and their hearts know no mercy." The scribe dipped his pen, his hands trembling. "And afterward," he whispered, "will there be peace?" Isaiah drew a long breath. The wind carried the scent of evening, mingled with hay and the sweat of the approaching armies. "Afterward," he said, in a tone that was both promise and threat, "there will be truth." When night fell, campfires lit the entire valley. The red glow painted Jerusalem's walls as if the fire had already begun, consuming everything. At the top of the tower, Isaiah stood unmoving. His disciples, seated behind him, did not dare to ask what he was seeing. Perhaps it was better not to know. The drumbeat sounded again. This time, no bird took flight. Even the shadows seemed to hold their breath. Isaiah inclined his head. His robe fluttered in the wind like a banner of another kingdom, the only one no man there could fight. "When you hear this sound," he said without raising his voice, "remember that you were warned, and that every seed sown in pride blooms in the hour of siege." The disciples lowered their faces. One sobbed silently. Another clutched the scroll to his chest, as if the written word were the only refuge left. In the valley, the legions kept advancing step after step. The march was not swift, it was inexorable, and the thunder drew nearer like a storm, ready to prove that no wall could protect hearts hardened by pride. Dawn crept slowly over Jerusalem. There were no thunders in the sky, no lightning tearing the clouds, and yet the whole city felt that something was rising on the horizon, more powerful than any storm. Zion, the sacred mount, lay under a solemn twilight. The temple rose there as a witness to ages that came and went. All around it, the walls were lined with sentinels, and every flame burning in the braziers seemed more fragile before the darkness that gathered. Isaiah climbed the stairs leading to the upper court. His steps were slow, as if each step carried centuries of memories. When he reached the top, he stopped, and for a moment he did not speak a word. His disciples came close behind. The youngest lifted his gaze to the temple, lit by the last torches, and whispered, almost reverently, There is the heart of everything, isn't it?" Isaiah did not answer right away. He only contemplated the bronze gates, so ancient they seemed to have been set in stone before any king dared to raise a throne. "It is," he said at last, "because Zion is not just a mount, it is the point where past, present, and future meet." The older disciple bowed his head. "Then that is why," he murmured, "that is why so many nations long to take it." Isaiah drew a deep breath. When he spoke again, his voice sounded heavier than ever. "They desire the symbol," he said, "but they could never bear the meaning." Along the eastern wall, soldiers stood in line with spears raised. The torchlight cast strange shadows across their faces. Some stared into the valley with the blank expression of men who dared not imagine what was coming. When Isaiah walked among them, no one dared ask him anything, but all turned to follow him with their eyes. His presence was a living reminder that prophecy did not sleep. Reaching the last parapet, he stopped. The wind rose from the plain like a warning. The invaders' fires multiplied, so many they looked like fallen stars scattered over the earth. The commander of the guard approached, his helmet hanging in his hands. "Prophet," he said, in a voice filled with respect and dread, "they are ready. Everything is prepared for the attack." Isaiah kept his gaze fixed on the valley. "Ready they are," he answered, "but they do not know why they came." The commander swallowed hard. "They came for glory, for conquest," he tried, "or for the gold of Jerusalem." Isaiah slowly turned his face. The torchlight drew deep shadows across his features. "They came because God allowed it," he said, "to weigh hearts, to fulfill cycles, and to remind the world that Zion is the center of everything." At dawn, a thick mist covered the plain. The sun rose like a pale disk, unable to pierce the fog. From the mountaintop, the sight was even stranger. It looked as if the city were floating on a sea of gray cotton. "It's as if we were suspended outside of time," the young scribe whispered, "as if the world itself paused to see what will happen here." Isaiah did not look away. "Because that is exactly what it is," he said. "The world always turns to this place. And what happens in Zion echoes to the ends of the earth." The older disciple stepped closer, the scroll pressed against his chest. "And after this day," he asked, "will there be any Jerusalem left to tell the story?" The prophet drew a deep breath. The mist carried a chill that sank into the bones. "There will always be a remnant," he replied, "because God did not write this city's name to be forgotten, but it will not be the same Jerusalem as yesterday." At midday, the fog began to lift. First the spears were revealed, then the standards, then the columns of war chariots advancing as a single body, and that was when Isaiah saw not merely an army of men, but the fulfillment of everything he had spoken on nights of scorn and laughter. Every soldier was the seed of something much greater, a destiny no one could interrupt. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he seemed as tired as a man who had crossed millennia. "Right," he told the scribe, "the Lord has gathered the nations against Zion. not for its utter end, but to reveal who will remain when all is shaken. The young man lowered his head, tears falling onto the parchment. Then, he whispered, "There is nothing more we can do?" Isaiah lifted his face. His eyes burned. "You can always choose," he said, "between arrogance and repentance, between fear and trust." The thunder of the drums broke the afternoon silence. The sound rolled through Jerusalem's streets like a caged storm. Every man and every woman understood, even if they could not admit it, there was no more time. But before the first battering ram struck the gate, Isaiah lifted his arms one last time. "Zion," he cried, "this is the day you will know who sustains you and who tests you." And from the east, a force unseen until now was rising, one that would mark the beginning of the greatest confrontation in history. When the thunder of the drums fell upon Jerusalem, many thought nothing could be worse. But Isaiah knew that true fear came from where few dared to look, the east. For while the legions marched from the ends of the north, another power was awakening, slow, ancient, like a beast that had hibernated beneath the dust of centuries. It was Persia, the old Persia, heir to kings who had humbled entire empires and subdued nations with a single decree. The news first arrived as rumor. A merchant brought word from Damascus of armies gathering in forgotten fortresses. Another claimed Persian generals were buying weapons by the thousands. For weeks, the people thought it was gossip, until the caravans stopped coming and the borders lay empty. Isaiah climbed to the temple terrace at dawn on a murky day. The wind blew from the east, carrying an acrid smell like fire. His disciples huddled beneath heavy cloaks, but he stood upright, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is how it begins," he said without turning. "Not with a trumpet, but with the silence that precedes the first shout." The youngest scribe, his fingers stained with ink, approached carefully. "Master," he whispered, "is it true what they say, that the kings of Persia have raised their standard again?" Isaiah drew a deep breath. The breeze struck his face like a warning. "It is not only true," he replied, "it is necessary, because every cycle of pride sleeps, but it does not die. And when it awakens, it comes back 7 times stronger." At midday, rumor became confirmed report. Messengers from Tyre, covered in dust, hurried down to Jerusalem's gate. On their lips was the news no one wished to hear. "The Persian armies have taken the fortresses of the royal road," one cried, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "They march with thousands. They say there will be no truce, no treaty." The commander of the guard leaned on his spear, pale. "But Persia has slumbered for generations," he murmured. "What woke them?" Isaiah descended the temple steps. When he stopped before the men, his face held the serenity of one who had seen it all before it happened. "Pride calls to pride," he said. "Violence calls to violence. Israel's arrogance has awakened the arrogance of the East. So it has always been." The messenger fell to his knees, tears mixing with the dust on his face. "Then, there is nothing we can do." Isaiah knelt until their eyes were level. "There is always something to do," he said, "but it is not to build higher walls. It is to raise hearts in repentance, for no human arm will restrain the fury rising from the east." By evening, the news had spread through alleys and squares. Some wept, others cursed God and the prophet. A few prayed silently, as if understanding that there was no refuge left but mercy. Isaiah returned to the terrace. His oldest disciple followed, carrying a prepared scroll. "I will write it all down," he said, "every word, because one day they will ask why we were not warned." The prophet laid a hand on his shoulder, his gaze heavy with sorrow and tenderness. "Then write," he murmured. "The Lord has raised from the east the power that will judge the nations." He called them by name, though they do not know him. The scribe lowered his head. The pen shook in his hand. "Why us?" he whispered. "Why is it always Israel that becomes the point where everything converges?" Isaiah looked out at the city, glowing under the twilight. The golden rooftops gleamed, but he saw beyond them. He saw the pride that would not yield, the hearts that would not break. "Because this place," he said, "is the center of history, and nothing that happens here is small." Night fell with cold winds. On the distant plain, the Persian campfires appeared one by one, like embers burning across the land. They looked like eyes watching Jerusalem, reminding everyone that the old enemy had awakened. The youngest sentinel climbed the battlements. When he saw Isaiah, he knelt, his helmet in his hands. "Prophet," he said, "if they truly come, who will dare to stand against them?" Isaiah did not answer at once. The wind lifted his cloak, raising it like a banner without color. "No one," he said at last, "no man will dare." But God does not hide even before the mightiest of powers. The sentinel lowered his gaze, clutching the helmet to his chest. "Then we are lost." Isaiah turned his eyes eastward, where the fires multiplied. "Not lost," he replied, "but tested." When the last glow of twilight died, the city seemed to shrink into itself. The generals withdrew to their councils. The priests closed the temple gates. And in the humblest homes, families gathered, wondering whether the new day would bring peace or the sword. Isaiah remained there, alone, until the wind ceased. And in that deep silence, he felt the heartbeat of something not human, a promise older than every siege. And who would dare to face it? For Persia was rising again, and no wall would be enough. The night that fell over Jerusalem felt heavier than any before. The wind from the east carried a cold that froze the soul. And even though the walls still stood, every man watching from their heights felt the same premonition. Time had fractured. Isaiah walked across the temple's inner court, his sandals echoing over the stones. His steps were slow, almost reverent, as if he knew he would never see that place the same way again. All around him, the lamps burned, casting shadows that danced across the cedar walls. He stopped before the altar, drew a long breath, and lifted his face. The embers flickered inside the bronze hearth, reminding him of how many generations had laid down sacrifices there, pleading for blessing, for victory, for more time. "Time," he murmured, to no one but himself. "Always time." Behind him, the young scribe approached cautiously, a scroll clutched to his chest. "Master," he whispered, "they say plagues are spreading through the fields, that the cattle die for no reason, that the harvest rots before it ripens." Isaiah turned slowly. The torchlight made his face look even more severe. "Because the clock of the Most High is not measured in seasons," he said. "When he decides to raise his hand, all things hasten to their appointed end." The scribe looked away, his fingers were trembling. "And us?" he stammered. "Will we be counted in that clock too?" Isaiah reached out and laid his hand on his shoulder. "All of us will," he replied, "for no one can escape the reckoning that weighs the heart." The next morning, the news came with the same cold indifference as always. New plagues had appeared in the south. The springs that fed Jerusalem's cisterns were drying up without explanation. The air felt thinner, thick with dust that settled in the lungs. The commander of the guard came to find the prophet in the court of the Gentiles. His eyes, once proud, were hollow with exhaustion. "The men can endure no more," he said. "The supplies are gone. The morale is gone. Everything is falling apart." Isaiah lifted his chin. His cloak stirred softly. "What falls apart was never solid," he replied. "What endures no hand can uproot." The commander lowered his gaze. For a moment he seemed just a man, stripped of armor and authority. Then, "This is it?" he murmured. "The end." Isaiah did not look away. "No," he said. "It is the beginning of revelation. When the clock strikes for the last time, every man will know who he was, and who he only pretended to be." By midday, columns of smoke began to rise. They came not only from ruined fields, but from villages burning in chaos. Some families abandoned their homes, seeking shelter behind the walls. Others remained, as if preferring to perish on their own land, rather than beg for refuge. From the western tower, Isaiah watched in silence. His disciples sat behind him, so still they seemed to have forgotten to breathe. "Do you see?" he said without turning. "Every flame is a warning. every plague a sign. Every stroke of this broken clock tells you the count is ending. The elder scribe clutched the scroll to his chest. And if there is still repentance, he whispered, will there still be mercy? Isaiah closed his eyes. The wind brought the bitter scent of burned wood. There is always mercy, he replied, but it does not cancel the harvest of what was sown. That afternoon, an old priest climbed the tower, leaning on a worn staff. Isaiah, he said, his voice unsteady. I remember when you were just a young man, your eyes full of fire. You always proclaimed these calamities, always warned that a day like this would come. The prophet turned to him. His face held no anger, only a weariness as old as the world. And even so, he said, you never believed. The priest drew a long breath. Because believing hurts, he confessed. It hurts more than denying. Isaiah lowered his head. Now the pain is no longer a choice, he said. It is a sentence. When twilight came, the temple bell rang 3 times. It was the signal that no one would leave the walls that night. The city shrank into its own fear. Every home was locked. Every heart beat to the rhythm of an invisible clock, knowing there was not much time left. Isaiah remained on the tower until the stars appeared. Then he raised his arm and pointed east. Write, he commanded the scribe. Thus says the Lord, behold, I count your days as one counts grains in a sieve, and when the last falls, nothing will remain hidden. The scribe traced the words with a trembling hand. Then he lifted tearful eyes. Master, he whispered, when this clock strikes for the last time, will there be any refuge? Isaiah did not answer at once. The cold wind brushed his face. Then, in a voice gentler than on any other night, he said, there will be one refuge, the truth, but few will seek it. And when it struck for the last time, there would be no refuge, only the testimony of what each had become. The night was departing Jerusalem with a slowness that felt almost merciful. On the walls, the sentinels stood motionless, their eyes fixed to the east, where the line of the horizon grew paler with each passing moment. Isaiah climbed the steps of the tallest tower before the first gleam broke through the darkness. When he arrived, he found the youngest watchman, a boy with narrow shoulders and a face as pale as the moon retreating into the dawn. The boy did not turn when he heard footsteps. He kept staring into the distance where shadow and light met. You haven't closed your eyes? Isaiah asked, his voice soft as a breeze. The young man swallowed hard. No, he replied without looking away. Because if I sleep, it might all end before I see it. Isaiah stepped up beside him. Together, they watched the sky brighten. For a moment, no words were needed. The cold wind brushed their cloaks. The city's banners fluttered like candles about to be extinguished. Sir, the watchman murmured, how much longer? The prophet closed his eyes. It was the question all Jerusalem held in its heart, but few dared to speak. Even he felt the weight of the answer rising in his soul before it could be spoken aloud. Only the last light remains, he said. And after that, nothing will stop everything from being fulfilled. When the line of the sun appeared, it did not bring relief. It brought revelation. In the distance, the columns of Persian soldiers shone like blades, the gold of their shields, the rhythmic movement of their standards. Everything seemed orchestrated to remind those who looked that no wall would be enough. The watchman shivered. There are so many, he whispered, more than I have ever seen. Isaiah did not avert his gaze. They are only men, he said. But they carry the weight of centuries. What we see today did not begin now. It is the harvest of seeds sown generation after generation. The young man wiped his eyes with his sleeve, as if he wished to clear away not just fear, but helplessness. And why us? He asked. Why this mountain? This city? Isaiah drew a deep breath. Because Zion is the center of history, he said, the place where God chose to weigh the hearts of men. Below, the commander gathered his officers by the gate. Every face wore the same expression, resignation. There were no more strategies, no hope of reinforcements. Only time remained, and everyone knew that time was running out like oil in a cracked lamp. "Guards!" the commander shouted. "Prepare yourselves. No one leaves their post. No one yields." Isaiah descended the tower stairs. As he passed the group, all fell silent. Their eyes turned to him, waiting for a miracle, for a new prophecy that might undo everything. But the prophet's voice offered no easy comfort. "The light that comes," he said, "is not just the sun. It is the moment when every mask falls, and every heart reveals to whom it truly belongs." A heavy silence fell over the courtyard. The scribe, who was writing everything down, lifted tear-filled eyes. "And afterward?" he asked. "When the truth shows itself, will there be time to go back?" Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "Afterward," he replied, "each will stand before what he chose." The light spread across the fields, touching first the raised spears, then the helmets, and finally the endless line of war chariots. The brightness seemed to consume the very color of the landscape, turning everything into a single brilliance that hurt the eyes. The watchman climbed the wall again. When he reached the parapet, Isaiah was waiting, unmoving. "Do you see?" the prophet asked. The young man nodded. His voice came out as a thread. "Yes, I see." "Then write it upon your heart," Isaiah said. "When the light arrives, no one can hide." In the marketplace, doors slammed in the wind. Some mothers shut the windows. Others knelt beside their children, whispering prayers they might never have spoken before. In the palace, the king remained in absolute silence. Before him lay a map marked with red, showing how many outposts had fallen. His fingers traced the parchment as if searching for some point that was not yet lost. "Bring Isaiah," he ordered at last. But the prophet was not there to attend councils at the last hour. He was atop the tower, gazing east with the serenity of one who already knew the ending. "Sir," the watchman said, his voice breaking. "Is there much longer?" Isaiah turned, and for the first time he smiled, not with joy but with compassion. "Only the last light remains," he repeated. "After that there will be no more doubt, and that will be more feared than silence." The young man closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. When he opened them again, the first trumpet sounded in the distance, and it was about to be heard, announcing that the time for questions had ended. The highest hall of the palace was crowded. Chandeliers cast golden reflections over tense faces, but most of the men gathered there struggled to appear confident. Between cups of wine and embroidered cloaks, the atmosphere wavered between bravado and hidden fear. Isaiah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. There were faces he had known since youth, generals who boasted of old victories, princes who had never faced a real enemy. And there were also the most dangerous ones, the counselors who laughed quietly, convinced that every prophetic word was nothing but theater. The first to see him lifted his chin and tried a disdainful smile. "Ah, the prophet," he said, raising his cup. "Have you come to tell us everything will end tomorrow, or would you rather pick the date of our funeral?" Some laughed, others only looked away, ashamed. Isaiah walked to the center of the hall. His cloak trailed dust that stained the polished floor. When he stopped, no sound dared to cover his voice. "You who laugh," he said, his voice firm. "You are like men dancing over an abyss, convinced the ground will never give way." One of the generals snorted. "Always this gloomy poetry," he replied. "Always this veiled threat. If your warnings were true, we would no longer be standing." Isaiah raised his eyes. The torch flames reflected in them like embers. "You are not standing by merit," he said. "You are standing by mercy, and it is reaching its limit." The youngest prince, whose face had not yet learned to hide fear, clenched his hands on the table. "Then tell us," he whispered, "is there still hope, or does your mouth know only sentence?" The prophet drew a long breath. His shoulders felt as if they carried the weight of the whole city. "There is always hope," he replied, "but it is not in the walls, nor in the treaties, nor in the coffers. Hope lives wherever there is a heart willing to bow." The eldest counselor struck his staff against the floor. "We will never bow," he shouted. "We are sons of David. This city will not fall." Isaiah turned slowly. His gaze met the man's without wavering. "Then you have already fallen," he said, "for there is no fall greater than that of a heart that never learns humility." The hall filled with murmurs. Some tried to protest. Others remained silent, as if shame were greater than fear. Isaiah raised his hand. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, yet carried a force no shout could imitate. "Hear this word," he said. "When pride becomes a wall, judgment comes like a battering ram. When arrogance becomes a throne, truth comes like flame." The scribe, who wrote down every syllable on a scroll resting on his arm, swallowed hard. "Master," he murmured, "can we still turn back? Can we still change?" Isaiah closed his eyes. A single tear traced down his face, so discreet that only the disciples saw it. "You could have," he said, "but with every counsel, every laugh, every cup raised against the word, you cast stones into your own future." The general who had mocked struck his fist on the table. "Then tell us," he growled, "when will your great punishment come? When will everything collapse as you so wish?" Isaiah turned to him. His eyes held no joy, only the pain of one who bears a truth no one wants. "I do not wish for ruin," he said. "I wish that you would wish for repentance. But the time given to you is running out like oil in a cracked lamp." The youngest prince leaned against the wall, his face buried in his hands. "Why?" he groaned. "Why do we always prefer to laugh instead of listen?" Isaiah walked to him and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Because listening hurts more than illusion," he said. "Because truth demands a price no proud man wants to pay." Silence fell over the hall like a heavy veil. Even those who had laughed felt something break in the air. Outside, the first light of morning touched the tops of the walls. The light was no longer just brightness. It was a warning. The scribe lifted his face, tears falling onto the parchment. "And now," he whispered, "what remains?" Isaiah lifted his eyes to the ceiling carved with symbols of ancient victories. "There remains a choice," he said, "between silence and confession. Between bowing the neck or watching everything shatter." The eldest counselor clenched his fists around the staff. "And if we will not bow," he spat in a thread of voice. The prophet turned to him as one looks at an already open grave. "Then your names will be remembered," he said, "but not as examples, as warnings." The wind entered through the half-open door, extinguishing half the torches. For an instant, the hall was left in twilight. No one dared to light another flame, and the chance to change was almost lost. But no one there wanted to confess it aloud. The sound began before the sun rose, a long, deep cry that seemed to rise from the bowels of the earth. Those sleeping in humble houses awoke in fright. Those keeping watch on the walls looked at each other, as if wondering whether it was allowed to feel fear when one held a spear. Isaiah was standing by the valley gate. His disciples were just behind him, their faces white as lime. When the cry came again, a little louder, the young scribe shivered. "Master," he murmured, "what sound is that?" Isaiah closed his eyes. The wind from the east brushed his face, carrying dust and omens. "It is the call of decision," he said, "the trumpet that announces that nothing can be held back any longer." The commander of the guard came running down the inner stairs. His helmet hung under his arm, his face aged by a single night of vigil. "Did you hear it?" he asked Isaiah, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. "They say there are more than 20,000 men posted on the hills." The prophet did not answer at once. He kept his gaze fixed on the line of earth that separated the valley from the slopes. There, where the mist was rising, the sound of the trumpets continued, a lament that was not human, yet seemed to be born from every heart. "The number does not matter," he said at last, "because this call does not announce only a siege. It announces the moment when every man must choose who he is." The commander wiped his face. When he spoke again, he was just a tired man. "Then there is no truce? No offer of peace?" Isaiah lowered his head. "There was," he said, "but not on the battlefield. It was offered on the field of pride, and it was refused." The trumpet sounded again, now so close the walls trembled. Some children began to cry in the alleys. The animals stirred in their pens. and a different silence fell over Jerusalem, the silence of those who finally understand that the choice was made long before that dawn. The scribe clutched the scroll to his chest. Then, "Is this the end?" he whispered. Isaiah turned slowly. His eyes held no anger, only an ancient sorrow. "No," he replied. "It is only the beginning of revelation." On the plain, torches multiplied. One by one, they appeared like constellations across the earth. Among them, the trumpets raised their cold voice, calling men to witness what they had chosen. The youngest prince came running from the palace. When he saw Isaiah, he fell to his knees in the dust. "Forgive us," he cried. "Forgive us, prophet. Is there still time?" Isaiah knelt too. He laid his hand on the prince's head. "There is always time for repentance," he said, "but not to undo the consequences." The guards hurried through the stone corridors, handing out arrows and shouting orders that sounded fragile against the trumpet's call. The gates closed with groans that sounded like lament. Isaiah lifted his face to the walls. Beyond the parapet, he saw the first banner emerge from the mist. It was black, embroidered with the emblem of ancient Persia, the lion with eyes of fire. The scribe drew a deep breath. His pen trembled as he began to write, "Behold, the nations rise against Zion, and no one will silence the sound of their march." The commander came close again. "Can you still intercede for us?" he asked. "Can you still ask your God to stay his hand?" Isaiah turned. His eyes seemed to reflect the whole dark sky. "What needed to be spoken has been spoken," he said. "What needed to be warned has been warned. Now every man will reap what he has sown." In the distance, the trumpets rose in unison, a chorus so vast it seemed impossible it had been prepared by men alone. The prince lowered his face, sobbing. "Then this is it," he murmured, "the sound no one can stop." Isaiah laid his hand on his shoulder gently. "This is the sound that echoes," he said, "and no wall, no gold, no stratagem will silence it, because it is the sound that announces the time has come." The trumpet sounded again, louder, so close it seemed to vibrate in every man's chest. The scribe stopped writing. He looked at the prophet as if searching for a final word that might bring comfort. "Master," he whispered, "when all this ends, will there be a tomorrow?" Isaiah lifted his face to the hill covered with banners. His lips moved in a whisper that the wind carried away. "There will be, but it will not be the same." And no one could silence that sound, because it was the herald of judgment and the possibility of redemption. The first blaze was not from the sun. It was from the flame. A torch hurled over the southern palisades, which in moments rose in a living inferno. The fire climbed with a roar that silenced trumpets, stilled commands, and made even the bravest warrior falter. The wind from the east carried sparks, as if the sky itself had decided to set the city alight. Isaiah was standing before the main gate when the glare reflected in his eyes. He did not look away. His cloak billowed like the banner of another kingdom, the one no one wanted to admit existed. Behind him, the scribe fell to his knees, clutching the scroll to his chest like a useless shield. "Master," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Then, it's happening?" Isaiah closed his eyes. He drew a long breath. When he spoke, every syllable weighed like stone. "It is. And not because God delights in destruction, but because no seed remains buried forever." The commander of the guard ran to them, covered in dust and sweat. "We have to fight back," he shouted. "We must counterattack before it spreads." Isaiah turned slowly. His face was the very image of weariness. "Can you quench the flames with swords?" he asked. "Can you bargain with the wind?" The man fell silent. His chest rose and fell, but no answer came. The fire advanced quickly. Houses built of dry wood cracked like breaking bones. Men and women ran through the streets, carrying children in their arms. The temple bell rang without ceasing, a desperate toll that mixed lament and confession. From the top of the tower, the youngest prince was shouting orders no one heard. His hands shook so badly, the sword fell to the floor with a sharp clang. When he saw Isaiah, he cried out through sobs, "Why? Why didn't we stop sooner?" Isaiah lifted his face to him. The flames lit his features, making the prophet look like a man made of light and shadow. "Because you believed the warnings were metaphors," he said. "But today, nothing is a symbol. Everything is real." The scribe turned to the wall. The fire was already reaching the battlements. Chunks of burning plaster fell onto the soldiers. "Isaiah," he whispered, "what should I write? What words can record this?" The prophet laid a hand on his shoulder with a tenderness that hurt more than any rebuke. "Write," he said. "The fire came not for lack of warning, but for refusal to listen." A thunderous sound boomed. It was not a storm. It was the roar of collapsing structures. The noise spread like a war drum that could not be silenced. "Run!" one of the generals shouted. "Get away from the walls!" But Isaiah did not move. His feet were planted on the ground like roots. When he turned his face to those who still looked at him, his voice sounded like the last word of an age. "Thus is fulfilled what was spoken. Thus is revealed what so many called a fable." The scribe fell to his knees, covering his head with his cloak. The prince let go of his sword and curled up beside the parapet. The commander dropped his helmet and closed his eyes as if waiting for the blade. And amid that chorus of weeping, Isaiah stood tall, not by strength, but by faithfulness. When the fire reached the gate, a gust of wind scattered sparks across the square. Women screamed, children cried, and in the midst of the chaos, the prophet lifted his arms to the sky. "Lord," he cried, "let at least the humble find refuge." The glare lit every face. The fire climbed the cedar pillars, devouring carvings and tapestries. The symbols of victory burned along with the portraits of kings. Isaiah lowered his arms, his eyes filled with tears that did not fall. "Look," he said, his voice almost hoarse. "When wrath descends, there is no boundary between rich and poor, between soldier and merchant. All become dust." The scribe lifted his head, sobbing. And after?" he stammered. "When all turns to ash, what will remain?" The prophet turned his gaze to the burning horizon. "Truth will remain," he said, "because when everything is consumed, what endures is what was real." The wind blew hard again. Sparks rose in a spiral, as if trying to reach heaven. Some men fled, others fell to their knees. But no one could pretend any longer that it was only a distant threat. The scribe dipped his pen into the inkwell. His hand trembled so much the lines came out crooked. "What should I call this day?" he asked. Isaiah did not answer at once. The fire roared, the wall cracked, the bell kept tolling its lament. At last he said only, "Call it the day when wrath descended." And there was still a final truth, one that burned hotter than any flame. When the fire finally went out, it did not leave behind the comfort many had hoped for. No cool breeze brought relief, no victory chant broke the silence. The city remained still, like a body that had just exhaled its last breath, and yet deep within each man, something whispered that it was not over. Isaiah was standing before the doors of the burned temple. The cedar gates were twisted, scarred by the flames that had run along the carvings like serpents. For an instant, his disciples thought he might fall. His shoulders sagged as if carrying the entire weight of history. But he did not fall. The scribe, kneeling, was gasping for breath. His cloak covered half his face, trying to filter the soot that hung in the air. When he lifted his eyes, he saw the prophet unmoving, staring at the blackened altar of ashes. "Master," he whispered, "and now? What remains after the fire consumes everything?" Isaiah did not answer immediately. He drew a long breath and exhaled slowly, as if weighing every word before allowing it to exist. "What remains is what has always been hidden," he said, "because fire does not destroy the truth. It only burns away what concealed it." The youngest prince emerged from behind a broken column. His face looked like that of a lost child. He approached Isaiah with uncertain steps. "Then," he said, his voice breaking, "is this the hour you spoke of? The hour when everything is revealed?" Isaiah turned to him. The dawn's glow made his tear-filled eyes shine. "This is the hour," he said. "The wind is already rising, and when it blows, it will tear every veil." On the eastern wall, a sentinel shouted, His arms pointed to the valley, where a new column of dust rose. But it was not fire, it was movement. An army approaching, disciplined, unhurried, like a verdict walking on human legs. The scribe crawled to the parapet. When his eyes reached the procession of banners, his heart beat so hard he thought he would die right there. "Another siege!" he moaned. "They are coming back?" Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "They are not coming back," he said, "for they never left. They are part of the same cycle that began when the first king decided he was greater than the God who sustained him." The prince collapsed to his knees in the dust, his hands pressed against his temples as if to hold back the roar rising from his soul. "Why?" he cried. "Why did no one believe when there was still time?" Isaiah lowered his gaze. His fingers touched the young man's torn cloak in a gesture that was not reproach but sorrow. "Because lies are sweeter than truth," he said. "Because pride is easier than humility." The wind began to blow. At first, it was only a breeze, carrying the scent of churned earth. But with every second, it gained strength, filling the empty streets with a sound like a groan. The scribe tried to stand, but fell again. His scroll rolled across the pavement and came to rest at Isaiah's feet. "Master," he stammered, "what should I write?" Isaiah bent down and picked up the scroll. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from reverence. "Write," he said, "when the veil falls, no one will say they were not warned." The wind grew louder. The banners in the valley waved like pale flames, and every face still breathing inside the walls understood, without needing it explained. What was coming next could not be stopped. The commander of the guard appeared, his eyes red with exhaustion. "Prophet," he said, "if you have another word, speak it now, for afterward there will be no ear left willing to listen." Isaiah raised his face to the pale sky. A single cloud, translucent like a veil, hovered over the shattered temple. "Hear me, all of you," he said, his voice steady. "This is the wind that tears the veil. This is the moment when the heart of every man will stand naked." The prince lifted his face, smeared with ash. "And afterward," he whispered, "what will become of us once the veil has fallen?" Isaiah drew a long breath. His eyes turned to the horizon. The light of the rising sun touched the banners, turning them into golden blades. "Afterward," he said, "each one will know whether he built his life on stone or on dust." The wind roared again, louder. Bits of straw and ash flew across the square, tangling in hair, in cloaks, in outstretched hands. The scribe clutched the scroll to his chest. "Then," he murmured, "there is no way to pretend anymore." Isaiah closed his eyes. The wind whipped his cloak like a banner without a country. "No," he said, "because no one will be left without an answer." And the last illusion was about to fall, never to rise again. The wind ceased so suddenly that some wondered if the world itself had stopped turning. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. The embers in the streets released thin threads of smoke, rising into the now clear sky. It was then that Isaiah opened his eyes. His disciples felt that this moment marked something no one could fully describe, a deep cut between all that had been and all that was beginning. The prince, kneeling in the dust, lifted his face. His voice came out hoarse, almost without strength. "Is it over?" he asked, "or is the worst still to come?" Isaiah turned slowly. His eyes were so clear it seemed all fire and all shadow had been extinguished in them. "Nothing ends," he said. "It only changes its name. What you called calamity is only the beginning of revelation." From the top of the southern wall, a sentinel shouted, pointing beyond the valley. On the horizon rose ordered columns of men and standards. But they were not only Persian armies. There were banners none there recognized, symbols belonging to peoples who until that day had remained far away, unaware of the old conflicts. Now they were all here, gathered as if some unseen power had summoned them. The scribe staggered to the parapet. His fingers clutched the scroll as if it were the only anchor holding him upright. "Master," he murmured, "what is this we see?" Isaiah drew a deep breath. "It is the cycle completing," he said. "It is the harvest of what was sown before any of us were born." The commander of the guard appeared, his helmet in hand. His face was stained with soot and tears. "They say Iran has risen," he said, "that its armies cross the land with alliances no one foresaw." Isaiah turned to him. "I foresaw it," he replied, "because this is not merely a war of men, it is a summons, a calling written before your thrones existed." The prince struggled to his feet. "Then," he whispered, "everything we have lived, everything that has burned, it was only preparation." "Yes," Isaiah said, "because every kingdom believes it can write its own story without giving account. But in the end, all find themselves facing the same horizon." The standards continued to grow along the edge of the land. Some guards climbed down from the battlements and knelt, dropping their weapons. Others remained standing, eyes glassy with fear. The scribe turned his face to the prophet. "Shall I write?" he asked. "Even now, when no one believes anymore." Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "Now more than ever," he said, "because one day they will ask who warned them, who dared to say what everyone feared to hear." The young man traced on the parchment words that burned more than any flame. "Behold, the nations gather against Zion, not by chance, but by design, for everything that was hidden comes into the light." The prince closed his eyes as if he no longer wished to see. "Then this is the end of our people," he groaned. Isaiah looked up at the clear sky. "No," he replied, "it is the end of illusions. But everyone who humbles himself will find life after the ruin." The wind returned, gentle, without the violence of the day before. But this time, it did not bring threat. It brought a different silence, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the final choice. The commander bowed his head. "Then," he said, "what is our part? If nothing can stop what comes, why resist?" Isaiah leaned closer until their faces were almost touching. "Resisting is not trying to stop fulfillment," he said. "It is choosing how to stand when it arrives." The scribe raised the scroll, his eyes wet with tears. "And when everything has been revealed," he whispered, "what will remain for us?" "The truth," Isaiah said, "and before it, each must decide whether to bow or to harden his heart." The horizon now glowed beneath the rising sun. The standards became clear. Among them, a black banner bore the Persian lion, the same that had haunted generations. But beside it, other symbols emerged, forming a chorus of powers that had once seemed separated by oceans and ages. "Look," Isaiah said, "the prophetic cycle completes. What men called myth is written upon the earth, before all." The prince covered his face. "I don't want to see," he moaned. "I don't want to know we were warned." Isaiah turned to him. "But you were, and nothing is more terrible than realizing it too late." The wind blew again, lifting dust and ash into brief whirlwinds. Everyone there understood, without needing explanation, that no treaty, no army, no gold would buy even a moment's delay. The scribe closed the scroll as if sealing a testament. "Then, has the hour come?" he asked. Isaiah raised his arm and pointed toward the east, where the columns advanced with inexorable steps. "It has come," he said. "Now each man will choose his path." And history had reached its climax. But no one could escape the moment when they would have to choose. The sun rose slowly over Jerusalem. There were no cries, no trumpets, no rush, only the heavy silence of a city discovering its true stature before the eternal. The walls, once so proud, were broken in stretches. The southern gate lay fallen like a dead beast, but there was something more striking than the ruin. It was the dawn. The light touched the shattered stones and made the dust shimmer as the wind lifted it in small spirals. The shadows that so often had seemed like giants now shrank into the humble outlines of what remained. Among burned beams and cracked blocks, a few wildflowers rose, stubborn, as if to remind everyone that life does not ask permission to return. Isaiah was standing on the broken wall. His mantle, soiled with soot, looked heavier than ever. His disciples were with him, some kneeling, others sitting, all silent. The youngest prince, his face streaked with dried tears, lifted his gaze. "Then," he whispered, "is this all that remains? Ashes and silence." Isaiah drew a deep breath. The gentle wind brushed his face, marked by weariness and years. "No," he said, "this is only the beginning." The scribe, still clutching the scroll, lifted it slowly, as if offering one last question to the sky. "And what does one do?" he stammered. "When everything once known lies on the ground." The prophet turned to him. His eyes held no more anger, no more sorrow, only a lucidity so ancient it seemed not to belong to this world. "You plant," he said, "because every ruin is also a field, and no broken stone keeps a seed from finding a place." Below, some women slowly came out of their houses, carrying children in their arms. The few animals that remained moved among the wreckage, sniffing for water and grass. It was a scene that mixed defeat and promise. The commander appeared at the foot of the wall. He walked as one who did not know whether to kneel or stand tall. When he drew near, he lifted his eyes to Isaiah. "I know we do not deserve it," he said, voice choked. "But is there still any kindness left for this people?" Isaiah climbed down the broken stones until he stood face to face with him. His hand rested on the soldier's shoulder with a weight that was at once compassion and truth. "Kindness does not vanish," he said. "It only waits for contrition. When pride falls, it comes in through the cracks." The prince approached. His steps were unsteady. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it belonged to another man, a man finally stripped of any crown. "Then, everything we lived was not just punishment. It was an invitation," Isaiah replied, "a calling you ignored while the walls were intact, and now, without barriers, it can finally be heard." The wind began to blow again, but it was not cold. It carried the distant scent of fields wet with the first rain. The disciples felt a strange peace, as if the worst had passed, and something new was already stirring in the cracks of the ground. The scribe dipped his pen in the inkwell that remained. "What shall I write?" he asked. "What shall I call this day?" Isaiah lifted his face to the pale sky. The sun, though weak, seemed to promise another cycle. "Call it the day between ruin and seed," he said, "because everything that fell has made space for everything that will be born." The prince closed his eyes. A few new tears escaped him, but they were not only of sorrow. "And if we choose to begin again," he whispered, if this time we listen." Isaiah breathed deeply. "Then it will not have been in vain," he said. "Then the prophecy will have fulfilled its true purpose, not to destroy, but to reveal." The few who were nearby drew closer. Some laid their hands on the prince's shoulder. Others bowed their heads in silent agreement. It was as if each man knew there were no more excuses, no time left to waste. The scribe began to trace the final lines on the parchment as the wind turned the pages, as if insisting on telling the whole story. When he finished, he held it up to Isaiah. And the end?" he murmured. "May I write that it is over?" The prophet laid his hand over the still wet characters. "No," he said, "because prophecy does not end when everything is fulfilled. It ends when the answer of every heart begins." The wind brought the gentle perfume of the flowers blooming in the cracks. The sun rose another hand's breadth, and in the silence that remained, each understood that there was only one question that mattered. What will we do with everything that has been revealed? Closing, because prophecy only ends when our answer begins. If you enjoyed this story, 2 more videos with equally inspiring Bible characters will appear on your screen. Click to watch, subscribe to the channel, and leave your like. May God speak to you, even in the silence that comes before the revelation.